An Angular application is a component tree with parent-child relations. Each component is well encapsulated and you have a full control of what to expose to the rest of the application and what to keep private to the component. Any component can have its own styles that won't mix with the parent styles. A component can have its own dependency injectors. A child component can have its own routes as well. While our basic routing application has routing configured at the root component level, it doesn't have to be the case. A child component can have its own route config. Imagine that we want to add to the employee detail route an ability to show either the employee description or to show the employee dependent info. Angular allows you to configure the routes inside the child component. We want to configure the child routes for the employee description and employee dependent, and this will be our final output. When we click on employee link, it will take us to employee description component, and when we click on dependent link, it will display dependent component. The app component will have its route config and will render either the content of home or employee detail routes in the router outlet. The component under the employee detail route will also have its route config and will render either the current or either the content of description or dependent routes. So let's code. So now let's reset our code to where it was after the basic routing chapter. First, let's create our description component which will display some text. Now let's code our dependent component which will also display some text. Let's go to employee.ts and import our components. Now import routing related components. Now let's write our router outlet tag here to display all the child component data here. Let's create the link to display dependent data. Note the leading dot in the dot/dependent. We didn't use the dot while configuring routes in the root component because these routes were absolute routes and the path fragment to be added to the base URL of the app. But now the dot indicates that this path fragment is relative and should be appended to the current path of the parent. Let's add our directives. Now let's write our route config. Description component is mapped to the path / which becomes a default route of employee detail component. The URL has a /dependent path fragment, then Angular will render the component dependent component. Let's look at our root component, which is app. Here the path of the employee detail route now ends with 3 dots, instructing Angular that the final URL should be constructed using the child routes. The value of the route link for the employee links is an array of 3 elements: the name of the route /employee, its parameters, which is id 1234, and the name of the default child route description. Now let's look at the output that we have got. When we click on home component is loaded, and then when we click on the employee description, the description component is loaded as it is the default child component. And then when we click on the dependent link, the dependent info, the dependent component is loaded.